Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
A Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts.
The gambling came into it when I was about 15. I had a few bob in my pocket one day, I remember, and I walked town. I'm not quite sure what drew me in there. I'd been thinking about it, I suppose, subconsciously for a while or whatever. There was something about the betting office when I went in there that I liked because no one judged me straight away. And I remember going in there and I felt safe in there, I suppose. I kind of felt, this isn't too bad. And then the worst thing that ever happened to me in my life happened to me. I did a bet and the bet won.
So firstly, you're on the other side of the camera than you're usually comfortable with.
This is unusual for me.
Yeah. So just pretend there's nothing happening. Isn't that what you say to the people? Just pretend there's no one looking. Yeah. Ian, we're here and there should be we should have a third wheel.
We probably should, but unfortunately it's just the two of us today.
Yeah. So Pat Sheedy was going to come and sit and talk to us here today. Now, there was a weather issue.
Yeah, it's in fairness now very cold on the west coast of Ireland today.
Yeah,
I've seen the pictures of snow and everything, so I think we can.
We'll just, he was, and he is caring for a relative, an elderly relative. So he had to, would have been worried that he mightn't have got home. But we are slightly used to being let down.
Well, I guess we've known him for quite a while at this stage, and it wouldn't be the first time that we've had to rearrange things, I suppose.
Exactly. So Pat Sheedy is somebody that has been in our lives for the past few years. We have made a very sort of lengthy podcast, which is going to go out over the Go Loud network. Actually, it's everywhere you get your podcasts. It's called The Gambler. We're hoping that people like it, because sometimes when you're a long time working on a project, you kind of lose sight of it, don't you? You sort of wonder what is this?
By the time it actually appears, you're going, what have we made? What have we done? Does this make any sense to anybody else?
Yeah,
so
that's the way of it.
Moment, yeah.
Now, we worked together on The Witness, the podcast that's still been listened to, and I still get messages, and you get messages. We all get messages every few days from people. And in a way, The Gambler sort of came about as a result of The Witness in strange ways.
Yeah. I think we were sort of casting about for something that might follow on from The Witness, that we, a similar kind of project in some way. Obviously with Joey's story in The Witness, we have someone who really resonated with people. Like, his story is so moving and people really responded to it in such an incredible way. And as you say, they continue to do so. Pat's story was a little bit different, but maybe had some echoes of that. Pat is a gambling addict. He has a history of addiction problems, and he's been trying to deal with that basically for a long time, and particularly gambling addiction is probably not a particularly well understood kind of illness, and we felt that maybe was something that...
And it can lead to crime and stuff. And really, there's no correlation as such between the two characters, between Joey O'Callaghan and between Pat Sheedy, but they both felt as if they had a story to tell, and we felt that what we do is maybe help them tell it, bring that out and let them take the time to do so, and then try and create something that that people can resonate with, that people can really see into their soul.
Yeah. And it is the witness is the witness in his own words. And that was a big, for me, that was a big part of it, that Joey would have the time to actually get this out there and people could hear his voice, as they said. And something like that with Pat, I thought could have been really powerful as well, because he obviously has a story to tell. When we met him, he was in prison, which is not the normal place to meet people.
Exactly. And I suppose that the sort of the production end of it is to keep us back out of it.
Yeah.
That we are just slight voices in it, maybe steering it sometimes and maybe speaking to one another about concerns we might have or whatever, but ultimately to let him tell his story.
Yeah.
So Pat Sheedy phoned me, I got a message initially from somebody purporting to be working in the prison service who gave me a number and told me to ring this guy that he had information about Brian Kenny. And this is where, you know, the
stories cross over.
The stories cross over. At the time, Brian Kenny was in Loughlin House. Brian Kenny was a drug dealer and a convicted murderer who had stolen Joey O'Callaghan's life as a young child. He had given him a job on his milk float, and he had got him to deliver heroin as well as milk. And he had groomed him into his world, into his very dark, horrendous world. And that is the story that Joey tells in The Witness. But Brian Kenny's a real person, and he's in prison and he's serving life for murder. But life comes to an end. And Kenny was in Loughlin House, which is the open prison. And he had gone for parole. He had been getting days out to see his family. And it looked like he was going to get release.
Yeah.
Which was a really worrying time for Joey O'Callaghan. And he was being informed by the prison service when he was getting, you know, days out. And it was just looking like this was coming to the end. And Joey was really only beginning to recover from what had happened to him. He had obviously been on witness protection, and he had gone off to try and build a new life for himself abroad, which hadn't worked out. He'd ended up, you know, back home in a terrible way and having to go for some therapy in the Priory Clinic over a year, like really serious therapy. And he had sort of beginning to, life was good, and bump, Brian Kenny might be getting out. So I was trying to get as much information as I could about Brian Kenny. What sort of state of mind was he in? You know, was he thinking about Joey O'Callaghan a lot? I was worried for Joey myself. So when this message came along that somebody in Loughlin House, here's a number, ring this person, they have information on Brian Kenny. I mean, it was just a no-brainer for me. So I phoned the number, and this guy on the other end was Pat Sheedy. He said he was surprised by me calling him. He sounded very concerned. Where did I get his number? Then I didn't really want to say where I got his number. I just sort of said, oh, somebody gave it to me. Listen, it's okay. If you don't want to talk, it's okay. And he, you know, he certainly came across as if, wow, this is a journalist on the phone to me. I'm in prison. This is really bad. But when we spoke again, then he had sort of calmed down on that. I suppose the conversation went from Brian Kenny to him.
Yes.
And he started talking to me about himself and this story of this. Came across a really middle-class guy from Limerick, had a really good job, you know, had been a gambler all his life. That had led him to crimes. He had a string of 100 and odd convictions, and he'd finally got a jail sentence. And he'd got a hefty jail sentence, and he had been in prison. He was coming to the end of that when he contacted me, but he had been in prison with some serious characters. Really serious characters, because of course he'd been in Portlaoise during a portion of that. But as he started talking about himself, the story was just, I was kind of taken by it, and I thought, do you remember me talking to you? I know I get very excited about things.
Yeah, but you do. But I do remember this one, because at first when you said it to me, I was kind of like, who is this guy? And like, why would anyone really care what his story is? He seems to have like ripped off some people. Doesn't seem all that nice, really. Seems a world away from Joey, like, and then I read he was working on a book in prison, and I think that was a big part of maybe what hooked you as well, the fact that he was someone who was capable of telling his story in this way, and was obviously in a reflective kind of moment, had a lot of time to think in prison, and was maybe trying to put together, you know, a story and a kind of put some sense on his life and why it ended up there. And when you have that kind of material there to hand, you kind of can get a sense then quickly of whether there's a story to tell for us. And I think reading the book, it was a very early draft of things, but I think reading that kind of made me think, oh, well, maybe there is something here.
Maybe there is. This sort of this life that had, you know, so much promise.
Yeah.
And this addiction, this terrible addiction, which is no different to other addictions as we discover in the podcast. And it has, you know, it is something that is recognized as a disease now. But this sort of addiction that had drawn him to very dark places and to do very dark things and to hurt so many people. And it didn't seem that was part of him when you're talking to him.
Yeah,
you know,
he was so charming and, you know, like he's well dressed and very articulate and very intelligent and curious and all these things, and very good conversationalist, you know, interested in lots of different things. And yeah, he doesn't come across like the kind of guy with the past that he has, you know.
And of course, it seemed like a simple story, didn't it? When we start, middle and an end.
It seemed very simple and straightforward when we started. You know, it's a classic sort of redemption arc. Basically, he's hit rock bottom, and through, you know, therapy and good help in prison and you know, learning to write and tell his story and get it out there, that he'd sort of overcome those bad times and was turning his life around. And that's probably that was a story we set out to tell.
Yeah, and I really thought that first day you put the microphone in front of him and told him to tell you who he was, and you know, that's always a good beginning. But you know, I just thought we would be, you know, I was almost sitting back like, oh, come on, let this happen. And then it just got so confusing and so, like, how do we describe what happened without, because we want people to listen.
Yeah. I mean, I think the best way to put it really is that we started out in a very good mood, and then the mood went a little bit sour. Things got confusing quite quickly. I think one of the things that maybe the first sort of things that we started to notice, I suppose, is that promises would be made and then they'd be forgotten about.
Yeah.
And then you bring it up again later and you'd be like, oh, yeah, I'll get you that. And then it'll be gone again. And when that happens a few times, you start to get a little bit worried, particularly if it's stuff that, you know, has seemed important.
Yeah.
Documentation, I suppose, is a big thing for us, that we can back up things that get said and, you know, just to lend weight to things.
And when we asked for them, it was just not a problem. It was,
not a problem.
Of course, it could be bank statements or whatever it was we were looking for backup. No problem at all. I'll have that for you. And then, did you bring it? Oh, forgot. I
wasn't able to get that, or I've asked for that. And, you know, and that can happen. Like, it's difficult. Anyone who's ever, you know, had to get old bank statements or, you know, old documentation, whatever, that is difficult to get. So you give someone as much leeway as you can get. But I guess the big one for me, and one of the first things that really sort of stuck in my craw at all with it was, he said that he had 2 boxes of documents that he'd gotten as part of a GDPR request to a betting company, or all the betting companies perhaps that he'd used. And he had these boxes and that we could go through them and we could see that the information that the betting companies had in him. And this to me would have been just a goldmine.
Absolutely.
In terms of his behavior and also the behavior of the gambling companies themselves.
To highlight the problem of gambling, really.
Particularly online gambling and how inescapable it can be, like such a deep well that people get into.
Exactly.
They can't get out of. And the practices of those companies in terms of targeting people and all this kind of stuff. That would have been, you know, that this is part of the story we wanted to tell, and would have been so useful. And so it was very enticing to have that there, because it's not something you can get your hands on easily. And over the course of the next few months, that
we had to keep asking and asking and asking.
And I think at some point it was shredded. Basically, as that happened, it was mentioned anyway. It was said that it was shredded, or it was gotten rid of, or something happened to it anyway, and that information was gone. And suddenly, it
was almost like that story about Clifton Collins and the code for the Bitcoin
code,
wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was like, oh, I put it in a fishing rod, and oh, the farmer put all the stuff in the skip, and oh, the skip was taken to China. Now that's actually a true story, and that fantastic story about Clifton Collins, the guy who had collected all that Bitcoin. But that's the way that those boxes seem to have, it was one thing after another. You could just, we never actually got sight of them, but they seem to be just keep going further and further away from us.
And further away every time. I mean, as I said, we never got to see them. And you know, these are kind of small things. Any one little thing like this is fine. You know, if you have a relationship with someone over a long period of time, you expect little things to just, you know, not work out or whatever, that's totally fine. But it's when they start to build up and you start to notice patterns, maybe promises get made and broken repeatedly, then you start to question things. And the big thing, I suppose, is that in the end, what we were left with a lot of the time was Pat's word.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, he's a
while convincing, he's a convicted con man, and he has lied and lied and
plus
lied.
convictions for fraud. He's lied to an awful lot of people in his life, and he'll tell you himself he's a very good liar. And are we happy to just run on his word, basically, on things? And I don't think we were.
Also, and you know, we can talk about this because it's out there already. There's 3 episodes currently released, and we'll be releasing 1 episode, I think, is it a week over the coming weeks. But it is one of the stories in the first episode, which is a very, I mean, you know, it's the listener can hear for themselves how convincing he is. He tells this story, and at the end of it, we go, that sounds very Hollywood.
I don't think either of us at the time really caught it. But, you know, he tells a good story.
Yeah.
Very engrossing. He's very good at telling it. He really paints a picture for you. And I do hope people who listen to it go along with it and ask themselves at the end, perhaps, like, how believable it is. But, you know, we didn't catch it straight away. And it was only like repeatedly going back to this story and going, is that detail right? Is that detail right? And we don't know. Again, this is a kind of story that we only have his word to go on. So we can never say one way or the other whether it's true or not. And there's so many incidents like that in the course of his life where you have to kind of go, well, let the listener decide.
Let the listener decide. And in a way, that's it, because we do tell the story of his life and we go right back to where it all began, to his first bet. And we follow him as he makes his way into a very successful career, and yet has this, you know, dog on his shoulder always, which is the gambling and the gambling and the gambling, and how it kind of brings him to a place where people talk about an addiction. You have to reach your lowest moment. And you know, he just seems to keep reaching lower and lower and lower. And, you know, the shame that he feels and you know, the shame his family must feel and all the rest of it. So we tell the story through it. But for me, it's like, I feel, and I hope we've achieved this, that the listener will come on the journey with us into what it's like to be close to, be, you know, in a relationship with, whatever that may be, a gambler, a chronic gambler. And to feel all those, because it just feels like you're being gaslighted quite a lot. And I remember the day or the evening we went to see Dr. Colin O'Gara, really nice guy and very personable. And he is the head of addiction services in the John of Gods. And he spoke to us in general about gambling and the addiction and the disease. And he was very glad to speak to us because he felt there's a stigma, and there's even a stigma to talking out about it. Yeah. But I remember that night going into that hospital there up in Stillorgan and sitting down and just, I felt like I was in therapy.
Yeah.
And Colin O'Gara was telling us, he was explaining to us what was going on. And it was this sense of, I actually felt a really genuinely big sense of relief. It was like, oh my God, it's not me.
Yeah.
You know, he's explaining what's happening. He was explaining what was happening to us.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that was the beauty of that interview, I suppose. And he was able to put, you know, all of his experience of watching these patterns in people over and over and over again for years and years. And he was able to point out that pattern in play again. And I guess that's, again, it's one of the reasons I suppose we made this thing, was because this is you know, living with addiction is bad for the person who has the addiction, but also it's pretty bad for the people who are around them because they have often no control over the situation, you know, and are suffering in different ways because of it. So for someone like Colin O'Gara to come out and say, this is what happens.
Yeah.
And here's what to expect. And it's not you. You're not crazy. This is often how things work out, and things will seem, you know, totally insensible to you some of the time. But then this is the process, and this is how it works, and this is how it presents. I think it is really reassuring to have that there. And it was reassuring. I hope it's reassuring in the series, but I think it gave us a lot of reassurance.
I was mesmerized. I was just sitting there going, oh my God, thank God. Thank God this isn't just me feeling this way. This is the reason. And also it gave us a little bit of an understanding of Pat at a moment when, I don't know how you felt then, but I was ready to just turn on my heel and walk away from it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's so frustrating to be around someone who you can't trust.
Yeah.
You know, like the lack of trust, and it's unfair on that person as well, because you start to question everything they say, even when they're true, and even when they're obviously true in a way, you kind of start to think, oh, but what if it's not? You know, what?
And then they're upset and they're feeling, hard done by and all the rest of it. And then also it's reflecting back to them and it's causing them to have distress, which you're not actually trying to do.
You're trying not to cause that at all. So it's a terrible negative cycle that people get stuck in. And that interview, I think that time we spent with Colin on the couch, basically. Lying
should
back.
Pay him, actually.
Probably should
probably
owe him a consultation fee or something. But it was very helpful, I think, to us, both personally and I think in terms of being able to get that message across in the podcast. This is a disease, and this is something that has a pattern that can be followed and recognized. And if it is like that, then it gives you strategies for dealing with it as well.
And I think it gave us an impetus to go on with it as well, and to complete it, and to put it out there, and hopefully it will. Look, does anything change anything? I don't know, but to help people understand, and maybe there's other people out there who listen and go, "Oh my God, it's not just me."
Yeah, I think that's that is, I think, also a part of Pat's motivation for doing this as well, of trying to get his story out there in the hopes that people will recognize something either in their own life or in a loved one's life, or something that will sort of click with them and be like, oh, that is a problem. And I think, as Colin O'Gara said, like, gambling is maybe the most invisible of these things. You don't see anything at all until it all falls apart.
Yeah.
Other types of addiction, you can kind of see the downward trajectory as it's happening, and that doesn't make it any easier to stop, of course. But there may be a moment where someone can step in or something like this. Whereas with gambling, it's
that was really. It was. I think he described it like, a gambler will have 100 balls in the air. Juggling, and it's this constantly high stress situation, trying to keep everything going. But when it collapses, all 100 of them come down at the one time. And he spoke about, treating people, and the families wouldn't know that the house was gone.
Yeah.
Everything was gone.
Yeah.
And they never knew they had a gambling problem. But like literally from 1 minute to the next, everything is gone, wiped. And of course, there's all sorts of issues with gambling and, the gambling regulations. That was kind of happening as we were making it.
Yeah, the sort of gambling regulator had been set up. It hadn't been officially made a statutory. It
was still going through the Oireachtas
or whatever at this point. But it was set up and had been announced that it was coming. And there are, since just recently in the last few weeks, those regulations have come into play and have passed through the House, and I believe that the Gambling Authority has their sort of regulatory status all finalised and everything. So that has been happening in the background, basically, as we've been trying to tell this story. And it is good to see that there is like a it's a problem that's being taken seriously, because the numbers that Colin O'Gara gave us were quite scary, really, and the number of people who might be suffering with this.
Very much so. And that's a very serious part, obviously, of the podcast. But I suppose at the heart of the story with Pat and what we discovered was not that black and white story we thought we were going to hear. It was the big question that we had throughout was, what's his addiction? Is it to gambling, or is it to the fraud?
Yeah.
Which was actually the one, because we did speak to a lot of people who had, like, his frauds are very intricate and they don't tally with the value of what he's making, really.
Yeah, they're generally for small amounts of money, smallish amounts of money. I mean, it could be a large amount of money at a certain time, but, I think probably the largest monetary value that we're aware of is somewhere in the region of €10,000, which was from a bank, so, this is not exactly
Lots of small stuff.
Lots and lots and lots and lots of small stuff over a long period of time. Like, as he said himself, he's at this for over 35 years. Like, this is a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Not consistently doing that necessarily, but, you know, the pattern goes back a long way. And it starts small and gets a little bit bigger, and then it stops for a while, and then it gets a little bit bigger again and stops again. This kind of falling back into old habits and being unable to fight it. It's very difficult to...
And what's intriguing is when you speak to people who have been defrauded, the blame they put on themselves and the actual, while the monetary value isn't huge and you think you can just get on with it, these people feel it's about them and it's about their lack of judgment and it's about their stupidity, don't they?
Yeah, I think the big word that comes up over and over again is kind of, it'll be pride or ego or something. This is what gets hurt more than anything else. And it's, I should have seen that. You know, that's just, it's a horrible feeling. Like, most people have probably been some version of this in their lives where something has happened. You go,
or even
in me for one there,
or even in a relationship that, you know what I mean, they've stayed in a relationship for too long and then they go, God, I should have, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And there's, you know, everyone kind of feels like, oh, you wouldn't pull the wool over my eyes. You know, I know what I'm about. Like, and then someone does it to you and you realize you're totally vulnerable. You know what I mean? And particularly, you know, there's some quite elderly people that I've spoken to who live perhaps in kind of somewhat remote places and who've been scammed by Pat. And, you know, they're scared. Like, because this is a guy who can do this and other people can do this. And how can they trust anyone who comes to the door if this has happened to them in the past? And that's a difficult sort of thing to live with over.
Sure is, questioning your own judgment and then feeling, you know, am I leaving myself? I was a mug. Yeah. Am I leaving myself vulnerable? Am I vulnerable? You know, what else can happen to me? It's all of that. But it's been an amazing journey. I suppose the real skill of being able to do it and tell it, and hopefully this podcast will resonate with people and you know, will make them think, or whatever we try to do with these things. But the skill of the interview is very much at the heart of it. When we started working together a long time ago now, you taught me how to shut the hell up. Even in uncomfortable moments.
Particularly in uncomfortable moments. And, you know, we've had some uncomfortable moments in the making of this podcast, and there's been a lot of awkward silences and a lot of long gaps between things. So those skills have definitely been put to the test over the last 18 months. But
it is very important to not jump in to try and take the moment and to kind of offer comfort or whatever it is you're trying to offer to somebody. Let them have that emotion, because that's really when you do see the soul of the person, isn't it?
When they've sort of stopped.
Yeah.
And then you wait and then they go again. And there's something in that extra step that often is the most powerful stuff and the most honest and the most moving. So I feel like if you can capture that, then...
Yeah, I shouldn't really be asking those questions, giving away your magic.
I learned it from someone else, so it's passing it on.
So The Gambler, which is wherever you get your podcasts. It's available. There's 3 episodes up. We're going to be doing a total of 8.
Yes.
And we hope that it is a fair and accurate story, and that it will, you know, it will hopefully draw a little bit of debate and conversation around this massive issue.
It's also a story with a lot of like twists and turns as well. Like, and I hope that the listener will sort of be able to be brought along with us as we sort of question ourselves and question Pat and question everything basically at some points. And hopefully nothing it'll be a mystery, hopefully, as well.
Journey with us all the way into the doctor's office where we needed help ourselves. Ian Maleney, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.